This panel is masculinity on screens. Unfortunately, two of our panelists have to drop out because of illness. So, Boni Sarkar will be presenting today. Boni Sarkar is from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and her paper is Gendered Notion of Baldness in Hindi Cinema, Analyzing Bala and Gone Kesh.
Today, I'm going to present my paper titled Gender Notions of Baldness in Hindi Cinema, Analyzing Bala and Gone Kesh. This paper is based on my dissertation where I looked at Indian women's experience with alopecia, which is an autoimmune disorder that causes premature hair fall. So I start with a little bit of introduction of how hair is largely denoted as a social marker of beauty and identity, and then look at the way this has been mostly represented in popular media depictions, and then go into a textual analysis of the two films, Bala and Gone Kesh, and look at how baldness is perceived in men and women in the Indian society. The definition of good hair is largely determined by culture, society, and dominant perceptions prevalent at the time. But hair as a gendered embodiment and corporeal materiality is subject to social structures which can shape its aesthetic and political possibilities. So the sheer malleability of hair makes it an ideal career of social message, personal expression, and cultural connotations. As a result, the very sight of potential hair loss threatens to invalidate the daily, ordinary ways in which people grapple with their hair, and as a result also grapple with their identities, relationships, careers, changing bodies, and social position. So when it comes to baldness, however, the narrative has mostly been universal in terms of its popular media depiction and representation. So though male baldness faces considerably less scrutiny in society, films, especially in Hindi cinema, have mostly resorted to depicting bald men in the context of a negative. So we have examples like Kulbhushan Kharbanda in the film Shan, or Danny Denzonga in Pukar, or Arjun Rampal in Rawan. So this is something that scholars David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder have termed as the narrative prosthesis, which is basically the phenomenon of the disability villain trope, which is exploited both in Indian as well as non-Indian films. So it refers to the usage of disability as a distinct mannerism to certain characters that separate them from the background of the norm. So it is used as a purpose of characterization as well as to evoke a metaphorical tool. And though baldness does not exactly fall under the same concept of disability, it is still portrayed and exploited as a tool of disgust, fear, hatred, or non-desirability. So this further highlights its non-normativity, both as a confirmation of the villain's position being outside of that of the conventional hero or the protagonist, and it also establishes the villain's distinction from the hero in terms of his appearance. In case of female baldness, so bald-headed women have mostly found their place in movies when they have either been forcefully shaved to embrace widowhood, like we see in Water, Deepa Mehta's Water, or as a marker of shame, like in Hiroshima Mon Amour, or torture, as in V for Vendetta, or where they're compelled to prove their worth in a male-dominated society by appearing less feminine and more masculine, like we see Demi Moore's character in G.I. Jane. So it is only recently that films have started exploring the possibility of bald people existing outside of the stereotypical reductive narratives. So films like Bala, then Chaman Bahar, they have come in the wake of what one can call the Ayushman wave Khurana of films, Ayushman Khurana wave of films. So where films mostly depict and explore topics that are mostly considered taboo in Indian society, as well as mainstream Bollywood movies. In Bala, perhaps it is for the first time that baldness has taken the central role of discussion and exploration in a mainstream Indian film, and is shown to be an intrinsic plot-centric characteristic of the main protagonist. Apparently, the only film that has come out in recent years to portray a female protagonist with baldness is a small-budget Hindi language film called Gone Kesh, which was released in the same year as that of Bala. So, a small summary of the two films that we're going to discuss next. Bala's and narrates the journey of a young balding man from Kanpur and how he confronts, battles, or tries to rid himself of and finally accepts his baldness as part of his life and identity. Whereas in Gone Kesh, Shweta Tripathi plays the role of Enakshi, a young girl diagnosed with alopecia, and how she confronts battles and accepts her baldness over the years and from mid-teenage to early adulthood. So in this paper, I basically discuss how baldness is perceived in men and women in Indian society through a textual analysis of these two films. Coming to Bala, so Bala opens with a poem about hair, by hair, for hair. So this is narrated in the background through the voiceover of Vijay Raj, and it describes hair as the one that sits on top of everyone's head and is the center of attraction and a treat for the eyes. In the context of the film subject, hair as an identity in Bala is established as loud, for attention and demanding entitlement, whereas its light tone and elements of mockery paint its subsequent hair loss as a tool of humor. So Bala is introduced in his younger years as a boy with a head full of hair and causing fun and mischief with his mimicry, outgoing nature, and narrative style. But it becomes evident that the character's personality is rooted in the way he looks and is perceived by those around him. So this sets the tension for the rest of his life as the film attempts to chronicle his journey with hair loss and eventual self-acceptance. So baldness here is unfortunate, but mostly denied, mocked, and ridiculed by the main character himself. Almost as an antithesis to Bala's experience, the film also places Latika, Bala's childhood friend, which is played by Bhumi Pednekar, as a dark-skinned girl who has always borne the brunt of ridicule and mockery due to her complexion. So by putting Bala and Latika's struggle simultaneously, the makers attempt to show how beauty is dictated by certain socio-cultural norms which affect both men and women when they deviate from such norms. So neither Bala nor Latika choose these deviations in their appearance from conforming to the conventional norms of masculine appeal and feminine beauty, but that does not excuse them from experiencing the same kind of shame and isolation and ends up highlighting the contrast. For Bala, the battle is mostly inward than outward. He is hardly ever shamed or sneered at in public on account of his hairlessness. It is his hesitation to accept the loss of his signature identifier, which is his hair, and thereby the lost chance of impressing all of his dreams or succeeding as a stand-up comedian. But rather than being ridiculed, he mostly finds support in his family, friends, and neighbors. In fact, Bachchan Bhai is Bala's mentor come friend and is played by Javed Jafri. And he mostly sums it up by saying that how in a patriarchal society, men's flaws are not considered as flaws. So despite Bala's apprehensions, it is never explicitly mentioned that he can never get married because of his baldness. But Bala keeps emphasizing his desire to get married to someone beautiful. And his only fear is that the girl would be put off by his baldness. So as Pari, the girl who he eventually marries and gets divorced from, he hides his baldness from her. But then when she finds that out, she leaves him, but it's a decision in a court of law. But Bala never felt the need to justify his search for a quote-unquote fair-skinned girl for his life partner. It was considered rather obvious and taken for granted. His only contention was that his bride may not accept his baldness. But Pari needed to justify her decision of prioritizing looks over other qualities in her husband, despite being the one who was cheated on and lied into the marriage. In fact, there's a scene in the film where Bala's father, played by Saurabh Shukla, basically highlights this dichotomy by remarking that how lucky he is that his wife did not leave him because of his baldness. A social cultural norm where it is expected from women to accept, sacrifice, and agree with their husband's situation in spite of their own needs, choice, and desire. But for a man to do so, it is considered as brave, unexpected, or rather celebrated. Now, coming to Gone Kesh, the film opens by situating the story and the principal characters in the city of Shiliguri. Now, as the film proceeds, the need to locate Enakshi and her parents in this small hill town becomes very apparent because here Enak's experience of hair loss caused by alopecia is also by her surrounding, the society that she lives in, and the kind of accessibility she has to proper medical awareness, diagnosis, and treatment. So when it comes to a chronic disorder like alopecia, the struggles and symptoms are very public and visible. So the external surrounding also contributes and become a factor in the way one experiences and deals with their condition. In this film, however, instead of proclaiming hair as the sole bearer of beauty and thereby the marker of the protagonist's existence, the film opens with Enakshi and her parents to disclose her baldness to potential suitors as she takes off her wig and hopes to be accepted in marriage. So here baldness is quiet, subdued, and mostly hidden away. The aspect of marriage and desirability also forms a central element in Gone Kesh because the film begins with prospective marriage proposals getting rejected on account of her baldness. However, what sets it apart from that of Bala is that marriage remains a part of Inakshi's journey as she gradually navigates her condition and her baldness. The film grounds hair loss as something that permeates the everyday aspect of her life. It goes back and forth between the past and the present as the audience gets a glimpse of how she started losing her hair, the various stages of denial, struggle, and acceptance. It is also interesting to note that how Inakshi's baldness is not only shown through the loss of her hair, beauty, or identity, but also from a medical perspective, where she goes to multiple doctors before finally getting diagnosed with alopecia. I feel this further reiterates the unacceptability of female baldness in our society versus the commonality of male baldness, because despite both the protagonists Bala and Inakshi losing their hair from a young age, it is only Inakshi who is shown to consult a
Soni,
doctor, while Bala, yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Please conclude in 2 minutes.
while Bala mostly resorts to homemade therapies to hide his baldness. So basically, how hair is used as a commodity and baldness as a consumerist anomaly in the film. Here, despite conforming to seemingly unattainable beauty standards, Pari, like in Bala, feels inadequate due to her shortcomings in academic achievements. On the other hand, Latika has always been very successful, but is still made to feel quote unquote less due to her failure to conform to expected beauty norms. So these expectations sort of operate in a realm which is defined by Angela McRobbie, and through which control over women is maintained mostly through corporeal means, while ensuring that the existing power relations remain intact. So, despite both Latika and Bala deviating from conventional norms of beauty and appearance, the neoliberal patriarchal forces of power work in favor of Bala to let him enjoy and exercise individual control over how his baldness is perceived, depending on how he himself accepts it. But in case of Latika, it binds that acceptance in an illusion of individual agency. Similarly, in case of Gone Kesh, with the neoliberal consumerist perspective and the establishment of the beauty industry, it categorizes the female subject into two vertical hierarchies, like those who successfully conform to those societal standards and those who fail to do so. So female baldness as a deviation from the norm can only sustain when abated by the mythology of self-love, which is shown in the film of Gone Kesh. So it shifts the responsibility of acceptance from the society to the individual, and is predicated on the notions of the traditional patriarchal validation. So here the bald woman is situated both in her failure to adhere to the female subjectivity, which are based on the beauty norms, as well as a consumerist subject failing to invest in the materiality of their gender expression. Female agency and control to engage, challenge, or subvert the stereotypes associated with women's appearance are bound within a sort of dichotomy of two conflicting positions. This is something that sociologist Rose White explains in her book Rapunzel's Daughters, where she says that if we ignore cultural expectations for female appearance, we pay a price in lost wages, diminished marital prospects, lowered status, and so on. But if we attempt to follow cultural expectations, then we pay a price in time, money, and energy, where we obsess about our hair, in low self-esteem, where our hair fails us, and in low esteem from others when we are considered little more than the sum total of our hair and our appearance. So coming to conclusion, in both the films, the element of shame and discomfort sort of act as a tool to govern individual or personal surveillance, which is shown by a lot of scenes where they look at the mirror and they feel ashamed by the way they're looking. It makes the characters aware of what they're lacking both in their gendered as well as consumerist subjectivity. In a neoliberal society where individual reigns supreme, the concept of quote-unquote perfect operates on competition and self-beratement, both specially playing out through material means of bodily capacity. So this compulsion to achieve this perfect plays out through competitiveness that is both directed inward, particularly through self-regulation, and outward through comparison with others. Shame inflicted upon the self also acts as a form of self-surveillance, where the characters are reminded of what they lack, which is further compounded by the symbolic violence that consumerist market forces propel on us on a daily basis. The inclusion of the gendered and consumerist subjectivity is essentialized through the imposition of self-love in both the films, where the onus of acceptance invariably shifts upon the individual and absolves the rest of society from introspecting and reflecting upon such unattainable notions of beauty standards in the first place. And the gender hierarchy is further maintained, where one can notice that how Bala's self-acceptance is devoid of any dependence on external scrutiny, while Inakshi or Latika's self-acceptance is only validated through acknowledgement, recognition, and acceptance through patriarchal means. So these are some of my references. Thank you.
So I'll start with a question. Generally, in media, we see that body hair is not in media, in society also. Body hair is considered as a sign of masculinity, and this has a negative implication for people not aligning with the normative masculinity. So, do you find this type of examples in these two films or in general?
Not necessarily in these two films, but I think body hair does become a very important notion in general, especially in recent years with how we have the naming practices which are really becoming more and more established. And we have these practices where men are interested in keeping a certain look like beard or hair and having a lot of chest hair, as opposed to women who are expected to shave their body hair as always. I think a lot of like Alok Menon is someone who is doing a lot of work on articulating these sort of notions. And we have films, but when it comes to alopecia, which is shown in Gone Kesh, it's a disorder that can cause like loss of body hair as well. So one of the types of it can cause loss of body hair as well. And since I did my dissertation on it, when I talked to participants about it, the ones who had alopecia universalis and they would lose hair from other parts of their body, they wouldn't be as troubled by it, since they were also women and it was expected from them that they would shave their body hair anyway. But it was mostly the head hair and the loss of it that caused the biggest anxiety. Which I think in case of Bala also becomes very prominent. So I'm not sure if Bala was losing body hair, how much of an anxiety he would have as opposed to when he was losing head hair. So
We have some questions in the Q&A. So Harman ma'am asked, you spoke about how in several films baldness is associated with villainy, while Bala reflects the insecurities it causes with regards to masculinity. How would you contend these opposing representations? Does humor play any role in the case of Bala?
yeah, like in case of like even in the climax scene when Bala sort of accepts his baldness as part of his identity, he does it through humor. And throughout the film, there is an element of mockery and ridicule, and that is mostly inflicted on himself. So he himself is like mocking his own baldness, and it's not really the people around him because they mostly show a sign of support. So yeah, like previously when we would say like say Kulbhushan Kharbanda in Shan, where he has this villain look and he's all bald and he's supposed to be this evil person. And similarly, say Sanjay Dutt in the recent version of Agnipath, he's also evil and bald. So it sort of evicts that kind of an image, that baldness is an anomaly. But when Bala uses humor, and lastly, when he says also that, yeah, we look different, but why should we change ourselves? We can make fun of it ourselves. It tries to turn that image into a more normative one, that it is not an anomaly or it's not as abnormal. It can be a part of one's daily life. The contention I mostly have with it is that it actually does not challenge the stereotypical notions that a man or a woman is supposed to ascribe to. So it still sort of foregrounds on that idea or an assumption that a bald man is, still, it's not a usual look. But when you use humor and you use it yourself, it sort of makes it easier for the people around them to accept baldness as part of their identity, to make them comfortable about his baldness, and he's doing it through humor. So yeah.
We have some more questions. Suchita says, could you please comment on the titles of each of the movie?
Yeah,
I'll read out another question. You can take two together.
sure.
So Shilpa ma'am asks, I was wondering what the increasing focus on hair of men, hair weaving for men, clinics that treat baldness has meant for notions of masculinity and their embeddedness in neoliberal contexts.
Right. So coming to Sucheta's question, yeah. So in case of Bala, the title is his name. And Bala is extremely, like, the film is so very much foregrounded in his subjectivity, and Bala is the central character, and as if the entire world revolves around him. So despite the fact that Latika is shown as this another like antithesis to Bala's experience, where she also has dark complexion, so in a way she also deviates from the norms where she's expected to look a certain way as a woman. It mostly acts as a filler to Bala's experience, and Bala also is actually one of the bullies of Latika also, but it's never commented upon, it's never really questioned upon. And it's only when Bala also acknowledges Latika that her self-acceptance gets validated towards the end of the film. So it's almost like every single incident that happens in the film revolves around Bala very much. And I also think that's a very masculine way of showing baldness, because like it's like if Bala is bald, then that is the whole subject and trope that we're going to explore in this film, and the other connotations are not really explored as much. Whereas in case of Gone Kesh, first of all, the title focuses on the loss of hair. It immediately tells you that that's something that's going to be the subject matter of the film, and at no point even throughout the film does Inakshi take on the entire like spotlight or limelight, if I may say so, because there the film not only just explores Inakshi's experience of alopecia, but it also shows how her parents deal with it and how the people around her deal with it. And it also never foregrounds baldness as the sole focal point of her life as it does in Bala, because everything Bala does is in a way to either get rid of his baldness or to contend with it or to ridicule it. But in case of Gone Kesh, Inakshi does go through the rest of her life as it is. She wants to be a dancer and she focuses on that. She has a job. She finishes college. And those things are given equal importance, both in terms of screen time as well as topic of exploration in the film. So I think that sort of also separates the two movies in terms of their exploration of baldness. Coming to Shilpa Ma'am's question. Yeah, so the clinics that treat baldness, this is something that I explored in my dissertation as well. The way these clinics sort of advertise their services is in a very is in a way that sort of reinforces the sociocultural norms of beauty and appearance. It's not just that they are telling you that we are going to treat your hair loss as a symptom of a disorder, but it's also like, oh, we are going to help you regain your confidence, or we are going to help you help your love life if it is getting affected on account of your baldness. So the idea is as if you go to these clinics and you help restore your hair, every other aspect of your life that is getting affected because of baldness is going to get better, is going to be improved. And I like it, the focus is there for men, but and it has been increasing recently due to the male grooming practices, which wasn't there earlier, like a few decades ago, but it's equally there on women as well. And in terms of masculinity, it sort of again reinforces, like I feel sort of reinforces those ideas that you have to have like good amount of hair to be considered, to have that masculine appeal, to be considered attractive, and to have like a confidence in your dating life and all that. So yeah, I don't know if that entirely answers the question.
We have two more questions. So one is, what do you think about the attention alopecia received after the Will Smith incident in the Oscars? First you answer this and then I'll ask the next.
After the Oscars incident, a lot of people started writing about their experience with alopecia. Interestingly, Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith's wife, had already talked about her experience earlier. She even went on she gave interviews, she even documented her journey, but it never received as much attention. But after that infamous incident, I think it received that kind of attention. So I'm not commenting on the slapping, like Chris Rock getting slapped or anything, but I think what it did is it sort of brought alopecia as a disorder to the limelight. And earlier, not many people knew about it. In fact, I myself didn't know much about it until a couple of years ago. Despite the fact that alopecia is one of the leading causes of hair loss all over the world, and it can happen to like anybody at any age, in any of any ethnicity, gender, race, anything. So in a way, I think it sort of helped bring that attention that, okay, this can happen, but it also helped bring attention to the fact that people can look different ways. without it being tagged as an anomaly or, like as abnormal. And especially when it comes to black hair, which has already been which has a lot of history and politics associated to it. There is always this pressure to ascribe to this European standards of beauty when it comes to women, especially. So, like seeing a black woman come on like a function like Oscars in her bald look without wearing a wig or anything, I think it also speaks to that fact that there is a change or there's a shift where we are getting more comfortable with accepting however our natural hair or hairlessness is like. So yeah.
So the last question we have today. There seems to be hierarchy between head hair and body hair. The body hair of men has shifted. Uh, Anil Kapoor exposed chest hair, but Salman Khan and other actors actually have waxed bodies with a six packs. So have standards for women's body hair also changed in films? Lakshmi ma'am asked this.
I'm not sure how much it has changed in films, but I think there's a larger conversation happening where women are talking about not shaving their underarms or not shaving if they're wearing something sleeveless or they're wearing shorts. But it's not as much shown in films in recent memory, at least as much as I can recall. We still the images that we still see of women on screen, especially also in Hindi films, is of women who have waxed legs and arms and very shiny body surfaces, which is not very realistic to begin with. So yeah, I'm not sure how much it has changed in films, but I think a larger conversation is happening around it. So hopefully it will come across in films soon. Sumit, I think there's another question.
Do you feel that the topic of baldness for men is more related to the beauty standards that men are also going through in the contemporary period than associating it with only masculinity?
I think it's also related to masculinity. The beauty standards that men are being asked to ascribe to is also related to a changing notion of masculinity, where you're expected to look a certain way for that masculine appeal. So, I mean, if you look at the kind of images we had of heroes from 70s or 80s films compared to the ones that we have now, it has changed drastically. And that sort of refers to the changing notion of masculinity as well. So yeah, I think it's related to both, to be honest, not more or less.
Thank you very much, Moni, for taking all the questions. It was a very good session. So we only have one paper in this panel.